Okay, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the notion of paternalism. Medical paternalism is one of the key factors that really give rise to modern medical and bioethics today. So let's start just with defining paternalism. The book notes that the term pater in Latin meaning father, but really the idea of the father or authority figure means that you are acting without the consent of a person's wishes, wants, actions, um, and sometimes in order to benefit the patient or at least avoid harm. So we're going to see that um, paternalism has both a negative connotation in the past that informed consent is trying to get around, but there are times in which you're either unable to obtain or even need to override a patient's wishes in order to provide benefit or avoid harm. So historically, we can see notions of paternalism going all the way back to the Hippocratic Oath again. In that oath, there is a claim that you will apply um, dietetic measures for the benefit of the sick according to my ability and judgment. I will keep them from harm and injustice. And in some of other Hippocrates' writing in early medicine, it's really up to the doctor to decide what information should or should not be shared. This generally was the cultural understanding of medicine that the doctor knows best and that you were subjective to those doctors' decisions. We should also note that culturally, around the globe, this is also how medicine might be understood. There is not the notion of rights and ethical obligations. And so medical ethics really came in a response to this, um, really starting with, um, you know, the harsh experiments in Nazi Germany, but rising all the way up through the civil rights movement in the United States to say, no, we need to recognize that people have rights and that these need to apply to the field of medicine as well. Paternalism still has a function today, and your book notes that there are really two elements of paternalism. One is where we have the absence of consent, or even we need to override the consent of the patient, and we'll look at some examples of that. And again, this is connected always with the welfare of the patient. It is not okay to override the patient's wishes simply because we disagree. But we need to make sure that there is a goal of beneficence, which will be a big part of our next unit and chapter. So paternalism exists when the healthcare worker intervenes to prevent patients from harming themselves in some serious way. And we do note in the text that paternalism is even authorized by law in case of a patient attempting suicide as one extreme example. This can often get complicated if we were to look at end of life issues as well. But for the most part, if we need to intervene for the benefit of the patient, then we're authorized to do so. There are both strong and weak versions of paternalism. The strong version is where we are overruling or overriding the explicit wishes of a competent person. And weak paternalism means that consent is missing, and therefore the healthcare provider really needs to kind of move on a doubtful situation. So let's look at that a little bit more. Here's an example of the therapeutic privilege. This would probably be a case of strong paternalism. But where we are withholding information from a patient when the physician believes that the disclosure will have an adverse effect on the patient's condition or health. And this is particularly on the grounds of anticipated emotional difficulty. The three principles that are noted in your book is that this should not be based on generalities, but really by a case-by-case basis. It needs to be founded on the belief um, that you have an intimate knowledge of this patient and that you're going to recognize that full disclosure of information might have significant adverse effects on the patient. And when you're utilizing the therapeutic privilege, reasonable discretion needs to be given so that there's just partial disclosure for a period of time or some sort of plan that full information is to be shared. Um, I'll just give a quick example kind of in my own life. I had a good friend who was involved in a pretty horrific car accident, um, and he and his longtime girlfriend were rushed to the hospital, both unconscious. Unfortunately, his girlfriend didn't make it. She passed away. And as my friend was recovering, pretty in ICU and in a pretty fragile state, he kept asking about the status of his girlfriend. And the decision was made to not share that information with him. That they felt given his fragile medical situation, that this could lead to adverse effects of his recovery. A plan was put into place about when that information was to be shared and how it was shared. Um, and it was obviously very difficult news, but for what it's worth, my friend still attests to this day that he had wished that that information was shared earlier, um, and with someone that he knew. The decision was made that a hospital psychologist was going to sit down with him, and so I share that again just as an example where this is used. But your text notes that the AMA really advises against this therapeutic privilege, and it has to have particular conditions. So the next we're going to talk about the role of surrogates, and so we'll do that in a separate slide, and ways in which someone needs to step in to provide that information.